Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Tom's Gadget Garage. Today I'm here with the Segway Ninebot Max G3 and we're going to be doing a range test to see just how much range we can squeeze out of this scooter. Now for today's ride I do have the maximum speed set in sport mode to 20 miles an hour, which is the setting that I use for all of my single motor commuter scooters. That way we have a very consistent way of comparing this to some of its competitors. When it comes to range, Segway states that we can expect approximately 34 miles of theoretical range in sport mode. And the important thing to keep in mind is that that is literally a theoretical figure based off of a 165-pound rider riding around in the most ideal conditions, minimal stop and go, completely flat ground, 75-degree Fahrenheit on a windless day, basically treadmill conditions. For today's ride, I'm weighing in at approximately 200 pounds. And, we're going to have some mixed terrain that we're going to be riding on. So we're on the Powerline Trail today, and approximately 70% of this is paved. The other 30% is very hard to pack dirt. But when it comes to range estimates, I'll usually factor in about 50 to 75% of the manufacturer's claim is something that I can expect more or less in the real world. If you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know that I've covered quite a few single motor commuter scooters, and one of the most comparable of which to this scooter is going to be the Segway ZT3 Pro. It's got the same 48 volt system, 12.75 amp hour battery, 597 watt hours of capacity. And on that particular scooter, I was able to get just over 23 miles of range, which is about a mile further than I was able to get on the Segway Ninebot Max G2 on this very same course. So as we kind of progress through our ride today, I'll kind of read out some benchmarks that we were able to make with other scooters. That way you have a good frame of reference. And at the end of this, I will download all the data from my Garmin GPS, which is what I use for all of my rides. And we'll compare that to a huge list of this scooter's competitors that I've tested. In terms of our turnaround point today, I will be monitoring voltage pretty closely. These 48 volt scooters, when they're fully charged, are usually somewhere around 54.6 volts or so. It varies from one scooter to another depending on how their BMS is set up. But on this particular ride, we'll call our turnaround point at around 60%, which comes out to approximately 48.8 volts. And the reason why I turn around at 60% and not 50% is that with these, personal electric vehicles, that first half of the battery is always going to be more performant than the second half of the battery. And that's because, as you wear that battery down, voltage goes down. And as voltage goes down, you get less, output from the motors, less top speed, less acceleration, and ultimately, less range as you wear down that battery. So, let's say, for example, you're cruising around in perfectly flat conditions. You ride out to the 50% point, then you turn back around, chances are you're not going to make it back to your starting point. That's why I always leave a little bit of a buffer in there, usually 60, 65%. That way I can maximize my chances of making it back. Because I'll tell you right now, I've definitely miscalculated range tests before and have had to push my scooters back to the starting point, which is never a fun thing to do. With bikes, at least you can pedal those back when you run out of power. All right, folks, so for those of you keeping track, we just crossed the 5-mile mark, and on screen says we've got about 76% battery remaining. So up ahead is going to be our pedestrian bridge. It's a little bit of a hill climb, which will give us an opportunity to test out the hill climbability of this scooter. But keep in mind, I've already taken this through our endurance and extreme hill climb test, so I'll link those in the description below. But here we go, cruising on up. And as you can see, this Ninebot Max G3 is making very easy effort of this climb. In fact, we're accelerating up, which is one of the things that I love about higher power single motor commuter scooters, is that they have a nice, small, lightweight form factor, yet they can tackle very steep stuff as well, which makes them great all-around commuting solutions. I got regen set to weak right now, so we're just cruising down here 14, 15 miles an hour, so that's really nice. But this scooter does have disc brakes, and I mentioned it in my previous videos, but when you get this scooter new out of the box, the brakes suck. but you know, once you ride it around for about 5 to 10 miles and bed those brakes, then you got really good stopping power. So just, you know, don't be turned off by the brakes right out of the box. Once they settle in, you'll have more than enough stopping power. All right, folks, quick update. We just crossed the 7-mile mark. We've been cruising around for about 32 minutes today. And on screen says we got about 66% battery remaining. Up ahead, once we get past the railroad tracks, I'll take a quick break. We'll look at the voltage and see how close we are to that 48.8 volts, because that's ultimately going to be our turnaround point today, which is approximately 60%. But as you can see, we're cruising around on this path here, which has got these gaps or expansion joints between each of these concrete sections here. And this scooter suspension is doing a good job of, you know, absorbing all that. You can't even really feel that through the handlebars. Now, with that being said, I am seeing reports online of people riding around on cobblestone surfaces, and when they do so, they get some pretty extreme vibrations that come up through the handlebars. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out on. You know, I don't really have much in the way of cobblestone roads to ride around on here in Arizona. I know they've got a lot of that in Europe, probably East Coast United States. But it's not just cobblestone. Some folks are saying that it's also happening on, you know, washboard type surfaces. Now, when I did my first impressions ride, I did cruise around, I think like 17, 18 miles an hour on gravel surfaces, and I didn't feel that. So it's got to be very specific conditions. And I do think I captured some of that when I was doing one of my night rides through a tunnel the other day. Let me know if this is what some of you folks are experiencing. I'll go ahead and play that clip now. All right, so here's our little tunnel area. The road does get a little choppy, like washboard surface right up ahead. There we go. And you might hear that rattling. That's kind of uncomfortable vibration. Got a little more of that surface here. You might be able to hear it. So as you can see from that clip, I was riding through a tunnel, which for the most part is smooth, but at the end of it, it does have kind of ripples in the concrete, which did in fact create some pretty intense vibrations that came up through the handlebar in the scooter. Not very comfortable and quite noisy. The suspension on this scooter, you know, you've got hydraulic coil spring suspension up front and in the rear, and the front ones can be a little bit noisy in those scenarios. I think you can hear the coil springs moving up and down in the stanchions, but yeah, anyways, I don't ride around in those kind of conditions. You know, it's not something that I would normally come across in my day-to-day riding, but it's interesting to point out because people are experiencing that. So anyways, let me know in the comment section below if you've experienced some of that vibration riding around on cobblestone or uneven surfaces like that. Something that I really like about this Ninebot Max G3 is how stable the ride is at speed. So we're cruising around at about 19, 20 miles an hour right now. And it's a very confidence-inspiring ride. Now, one common question that I get from a lot of folks is, how does the Ninebot Max G3 compare to the Segway ZT3 Pro? Well, from a stability standpoint, I'll tell you right now, the ZT3 Pro is definitely the more stable scooter at speed. It does have that edge, and you know, it's not going to be a drastic difference, but if I have to compare the two, yeah, I mean 25 miles an hour, for example, on that scooter, it feels more dialed in, more like you're riding on rails than this scooter. But this scooter is still very stable, among the most stable that I've tested. So anyways, ZT3 Pro, Ninebot Max G3 are both solid options, you know, for all these scooters, but they're very different. You know, ZT3 Pro is a much more massive and heavier scooter than this Ninebot Max G3. But what I really like about the ZT3 Pro is the fact that it has a functional kick plate at the back, whereas this Ninebot Max G3 kind of has a flared tail, which I'll tell you right now really isn't enough. I think they definitely missed the mark in that department. You know, I think they kept it as similar as possible to the Ninebot Max G2, and you can tell the designs are almost identical in many respects, but hopefully in the Ninebot Max G4, or you know, whatever the successor to this scooter is, I hope they put a functional kick plate, because I really do think that was a big miss on this scooter. All right, folks, so looking at our voltage, oops, I went a little too far. So 48.2 volts. Yeah, we're about 10 miles right now. So I'm gonna get it turned around, and hopefully we can make it back to our starting point. 48.2 is a little bit lower than I was wanting. I wanted to make that turnaround point at 48.8, so hopefully we make it back. The good news is Segway, I think they've got that ride-along technology on this scooter as well, so you know, it'll ramp down our speed and try and maximize our range towards the end. At least that's what I did with the Ninebot Max G2, so we'll see if this scooter does the same. Now, I don't know what you're hearing on the camera right now, but this scooter has near silent operation. The motor is very quiet. And even though it's a bigger motor, 850 nominal watts, 2,000 watts of peak power, you can almost not even hear it, which is very nice. The suspension's also quiet, so if you're coming from a Ninebot Max G2, you might notice on that particular scooter that when you go over bumps at higher speeds, especially aggressive bumps, you'll hear a clunk in the rear suspension, which me personally, I'm not a big fan of noisy suspensions. You know, I think they should be as quiet as possible. If they're too noisy, it makes your scooter kind of sound junky. So the Ninebot Max G2 had that clunk in the rear, but only when going over aggressive stuff really fast. With this, it's silent. I don't hear any kind of clunking at all whatsoever, so kudos to Segway for making this a nice quiet ride. All right, folks, a quick update. We just crossed the 12-mile mark. Been riding around for about 51 minutes, so just shy of an hour. And battery is showing about 40%, so that's a little concerning. I hope we can make it back. Kind of reminiscent of the range that we got on the Segway ZT3 Pro. You know, that also eats through the battery. One exciting thing that Segway did announce, though, is the fact that they're going to be selling an optional battery that attaches to the neck of the scooter. So if you want to extend out your range, you'll be able to do that, and I think that's a really nice feature. We'll have to see what the pricing on that is, but they did say it's going to be available sometime in the, I think, like June, July time frame. So when that does come out, I'll be sure to place an order, and we'll redo all of our range tests and everything with the expansion pack. Little speed bump here, right up and over that. Now, obviously we don't have a kick plate, so that rear fender kind of bumped into my back heel. If they had a kick plate, we wouldn't be worrying about that. But that's just for my riding stance. Some people might ride differently, and that'll never be an issue. All right, so here's some hard packed dirt and gravel, and we're going right up and over this, no problem at all. And we'll transition back over to the paved surface here. Nice. Very good dampening on this scooter, I like it. One of the big advantages that Segway has in the scooter market is their technology and how much tech they load into these things. It's pretty crazy if you think about it. But one of the features that I tested out for the first time a few weeks back was scheduled charging. So I plugged the scooter in, before I went to bed, and then I went ahead and scheduled my charge to happen in the morning when I wake up. That way I don't have to go into the garage and set all that up. And I set it for 7 a.m. And to have it charged for a few hours, and it did it. And by the time I came into the garage, the scooter was fully charged. I mean, that's an awesome feature. Now, they also give you the ability to set the charge percentage. So if you want to charge up to 80%, you can set that in the app, and it'll charge up to 80% and cut off that charge. You got traction control, and there's just a bunch of other stuff in there, airlock. So if you're looking for a scooter with lots of bells and whistles and tech, I'll tell you right now, these Segway scooters come fully loaded. Definitely way above and beyond any other scooter on the market today. I mean, there's some other competitors that also have apps and some other things, and they're putting in cool features, but from a tech perspective, nobody comes close to Segway so far. But that's what I love about it, though. You got different companies are innovating in different things, and they all push the industry forward. So hopefully we see more goodness out of more scooter companies in the near future. All right, folks, so we are coming up on our pedestrian bridge again. This is going to eat up all of our precious battery, but we're cruising up no problem at all. Just as easy as it was the first time around. All right, coming back down. Still have weak regen enabled, and we're, hands off the brakes, and we're coming down 13, 14 miles an hour. So we're putting some juice back into the battery, but just keep in mind, with regen, it's a trivial amount. In the most ideal conditions, you might get 4 or 5% back in that battery. For crazy hills, maybe a little bit more. So one of the things that I think is hurting the range on this scooter is the acceleration settings. I think in the app for the Ninebot Max G2, it allows you to go in there and dial those down. I didn't actually see that for this scooter. So, I think they can kind of tame down the acceleration a bit, or at least give users the option to do that. That way we can extend these rides out even further. I think the acceleration in the default settings is it's a little much. Cool if you want to zip around at speed, great, but build in the option to go ahead and tailor that further. I think that'll be perfect. So for those of us that want to, maximize range, we'll be able to do it. All right, folks, quick update. We just crossed the 15-mile mark. We've been riding around for about a little over an hour at this point. Screen says 26% battery remaining, and it's estimating we got about 6.4 miles left in the tank. I hope that's true. That should get us back to our starting point, but I think we're going to be cutting it close today, unfortunately. So we'll see how we do. I know some folks are going to be interested in seeing, how much range I can get out of this scooter, with maximum speed set to 28 miles an hour and riding more aggressively. If you'd like to see that, check out my night ride video. I was cruising around on the scooter basically until we got to empty. And so that'll give you a great frame of reference. Obviously, it wasn't on this particular trail, so it's not 100% apples to apples, but that's more city riding, off of these paths and cruising around on city roads, different places over there. So check that out. I'll include a link to that night ride in the description below. All right, so we are back on to riding off the beaten path again. And once again, this suspension's doing a really good job of absorbing all the gravel and bumps in the road here. So really liking this suspension so far. Quick little ride up this curb here. No problem at all. All right, you can definitely feel that our acceleration has slowed quite a bit now that we're below 20%. Looks like we're at 18% battery remaining. So once you wear down the battery, you're going to get less output. As I was mentioning before, we got less voltage, so we're going to have less acceleration, top speed. It takes us longer to get up to those top speeds. And so that's definitely something to factor in if you're going to be going on longer rides. That bottom half of the battery isn't going to be as performant as the top half. And that is completely normal with, these electric bikes, electric scooters, things like that. You always get that rush at the beginning. So if you're ever going to be doing speed tests and stuff like that, definitely do that first half of the battery. Now, if you're curious what this scooter's like riding from an intersection here, there we go. No problem at all. No park mode because I pulled that brake lever before we got started there. And as you can see, throttle's all the way in. Acceleration is definitely a lot slower. Here's a gravel surface that I'm riding around on right now at about, I would say 15 miles an hour. And suspension's doing great. This is a very comfortable ride, even on this gravel surface. Let's see if we can get through some rougher stuff here. It's doing a good job. I think it's only when, you're riding around on those kind of washboard surfaces, cobblestone surfaces that don't have any give that you're going to run into some of that, handlebar and suspension vibration that folks are talking about. But, for all the riding that I do, it really hasn't been an issue. I am very interested to see how much range we're able to squeeze out of this scooter today. Our first benchmark is going to be the distance that we got on the Apollo Go, which was 19.2 miles if I remember correctly. And so, you know, we haven't crossed that point yet, and we've got about 13% battery remaining. But if we can get past that, the next scooter in line is the Ninebot Max G2. That was about 22 miles, a ZT3 Pro, and VMAX VX4 at approximately 22.5 to 23 miles. So those are going to be our benchmarks. We'll see if we can reach the first one with this Max G3 today. All right, folks, I got throttle all the way in, and the most we're able to go is about 16 miles an hour, and that's because we're at 11% battery remaining. So we're definitely cutting this ride close today. I have a feeling we might end up walking the scooter a little bit. I don't know, we'll see. Right now, the on-screen display is telling me that here in sport mode, we got approximately 2.2 miles of range remaining. You know, we're on this little bike path right now, but you know, we've got about a couple miles remaining, I think. So we're definitely cutting it close today, folks. Quick update for you here. We just crossed the range that we were able to get on the Apollo Go, so we're at about 19.5 miles at this point. Next up in line is a Ninebot Max G2 at 22 miles, but I don't think we're going to be making that today, folks. We're at 7% battery remaining and about 1.7 miles of estimated range. Throttle's all the way in right now, and we're able to maintain about 12 miles an hour in sport mode. So speed is dropping. So with this Ninebot Max G3, similar to how it does it on some of the other Segway scooters, it's going to dial down your speed gradually as you get closer and closer to zero. And that's really going to help you maximize your range. Some scooters will allow you to, you know, cruise around at a much higher speed, and then you basically run into a cliff where it just drops the power. Not with this scooter. This scooter here is going to prioritize range for you over speed. You know, at 10 miles an hour, I can take my hand off the handlebar. Not that I'm recommending you do that. But with this Ninebot Max G3, they do have the axle offset. So it sits behind the line of the handlebar and front fork. And that gives you really good stability, you know, especially straight line stability. So yeah, I don't recommend taking your hands off the handlebars on any scooter, because I would say most scooters out there, you take your hands off the handlebar, especially when you're cruising around at speed, and you're almost bound to eat it. So definitely want to avoid that. I mentioned one of my other videos, but if you're cruising around the neighborhood and your neighbor's, you know, waving hi to you, do not fall for that temptation. Keep your hands on the handlebar. Give them the head nod, you know. Okay, I did not catch that on camera, but once you get to 5% battery or drop below 5% battery, it does give you a kind of loud, audible tone, letting you know that you're basically in crawl to home mode, which is what we're in right now. Throttle's all the way in, 9 miles an hour on completely flat ground, so it's definitely dialing back power for us here. But we'll keep on going. All right, so we're cruising around, you know, 7, 8 miles an hour. 2% battery remaining, folks. And we're just putting along. Got some water here. Not too concerned about that, because we got the IPX6 water resistance rating, which is an improvement to the rating that we had on the Ninebot Max G2. I think that was IPX5, if I remember correctly. You know, but you know, if you're at the bottom of the battery, you know, this scooter is going to do whatever it can to squeeze out as much range for you. You know, 8 miles an hour, I mean, that's still pretty good, you know, 2% battery remaining. One of the interesting things about the wheel offset on this scooter is that you've got some, you know, funky riding characteristics at slow speeds, you know. It's definitely different than a scooter that doesn't have that offset, but super controllable. All right, folks, so there you have it. That was our range test with the Segway Ninebot Max G3. And on this particular ride, we went 22.47 miles, which means we exceeded by a hair the distance that we were able to get on the Ninebot Max G2. We had an average moving speed of 13.7 miles an hour. We had a top speed of 20.9 miles an hour. Elevation gain 364 feet. And we were cruising around today for an hour and 46 minutes. So overall, the performance of the Ninebot Max G3 is very similar to the Ninebot Max G2 and ZT3 Pro, as well as the VMAX VX4 LT that I tested out on this channel. The ride was very comfortable. Suspension did a great job of absorbing a lot of the lumps and bumps in the road. And I really do like that, it gives you estimates as to how much range you've got remaining. So those are definitely nice tech features that you get with this scooter. Like I was mentioning, Segway will be coming out with that expansion battery pack, which will allow you to go even further on this scooter. But one thing that I think Segway can improve is giving users, a little more granular control of acceleration settings. Because for a test like this, I think the acceleration is a little bit too strong. And if we can just go in and dial that down, make it a little bit weaker, we could have probably extended this ride out even further. But anyways, let me know if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns. Happy to address those in the comments section below. And if you do want to pick one of these scooters up, I will include an affiliate link in the description below. And if you use it to make your purchase, it absolutely helps support this channel and keeps the wheels moving on future reviews. As always, thank you so much for tuning into Tom's Gadget Garage. We'll see you next time.